good evening, and thank you for joining us here on blackdoctor.org for a program that is near and dear to my heart. I know so much on Black Doctor, we talk about what's happening right now, or we talk about what's happened in the past. Very few times we get a chance of what's happening in the future of healthcare, and that's what this program is all about. If you don't know who I am Ellis Dean, the Director of Digital Program and Production at blackdoctor.org, and this show is called Clinical Trials in Black Folks. And this program is designed to help you understand what clinical trials are, and why they're important for you in your overall health and wellness moving forward into the future. And so we've had a number of guests. You can go back and watch some of the other programs. We've had guests from Sinai, we've had guests from Merck, we've had some wonderful guests come on. We had some doctors that participated in clinical trials themselves. We've had them come on and talk about clinical trials and specifically how they impact people of color. Well, tonight we have a wonderful guest here, as you can see, all with us this evening. Beautiful smile. And we're going to talk about clinical trials again. So let me introduce my guest to you all, and then we'll move forward and ask kind of some questions, and we'll answer your questions. So there's a couple of things I need you to do before we begin, and that is, number one, I need you to let us know where you're watching from. I always like to know where people are watching us from all over the world, and so drop that in the comment section, and we'll give you a shout out if it's appropriate. The second thing we want you to do is share this program, like and share this program, put this on your page. If you know somebody that needs this information, tag them or share this on your page so we can get it out to as many people as possible. And then finally, the third thing we need you to do is ask questions. So if you have some questions, please drop those in the comments and we will get them asked and answered, because this is all about getting your questions answered. You with me? All right, let's go. So my guest that has been sitting here so patiently is Miss Kendal Whitlock. And she is the head of digital optimization, RWE clinical trials with Walgreens Boot Alliance. This role leverages data assets and partnerships to advance culturally responsive approaches to clinical research. In her role, Ms. Whitlock focuses on digital solutions to drive access and opportunities that are both flexible and convenient for participants. Ms. Whitlock brings nearly 25 years of pharmaceutical industry experience to this new role. She holds a Master's of Public Health from Columbia University and earned a BA with honors from Spelman College right here where I live in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Ms. Whitlock. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. I want to take this opportunity, Ellis, to thank you and to thank blackdoctor.org for having me on the program this evening. I'll tell you, I joined Walgreens about 7.5 months ago after learning about the commitment that our CEO, Roz Brewer, and Chief Trials Officer, Ramita Tandon, made to address healthcare disparities. Now, let me take you back a few years. We've been in this pandemic coming into 3 years, and during the COVID-19 Health Equity Initiative, we saw, of course, the globe was watching higher rates of hospitalization, higher rates of mortality in Black and Hispanic and other ethnic minorities compared to white patients. We also saw that Walgreens was able during this pandemic to dispense 70 million vaccinations. And one of the things that surprised us most was seeing patients from socially vulnerable populations come to their local Walgreens store for that shot. Now, this is a population we know that has historically been referred to as harder to reach, perhaps needing different services. But this is a population that also relied upon and found their shot at Walgreens. So until now, Walgreens has been a traditional retail pharmacy. You got your front of store retail, you got your regular pharmacy in the back, beauty products, photography, and there are over 9,000 stores in the United States. 78% of Americans are within 5 miles of a Walgreens store. And just about 51% of the population is within that small distance, meaning you can get to your Walgreens store. And 51% are in socially vulnerable communities. And sometimes this is medically underserved. This could be associated with socioeconomics. So this is an opportunity for us to reimagine who the pharmacy can be. And this is going to become a healthcare destination. This is the vision of Walgreens today and Walgreens in the future. Let's change the paradigm of just providing secondary therapy, but maybe wraparound services where even clinical trials become a care option. We have a tremendous pharmacy volume, right? The data is tremendous, 130 million records of our pharmacy data. We match that with strategic collaborations and, of course, the proximity to where people live, pray, play, and work. And Walgreens will fundamentally change the experience that patients have who are interested in participating in clinical trials. So it is really a pleasure to be here with you, Ellis, and to have this opportunity to share some of the insights about what we're doing.
I'm just going to put that's the great statistic on the screen here, because I think that is fantastic. 78% of U.S. population lives within 5 miles of a Walgreens, so that means it's accessible, and that's kind of been a buzzword when we're talking about healthcare, and particularly the better treatments, the better medications. It's got to be accessible, and when you talk about 78% within 5 miles, that to me says it's accessible. So I'm going to do a little word association with you, if you don't mind.
Great.
All right. So first two words are clinical trials. What comes to mind when you hear the term clinical trials?
Well, me personally, when I hear the term clinical trials, the first trigger is historic atrocities against people of color. Harriet Washington published extensively in Medical Apartheid, a book several years ago, about a 300-year history, which included the U.S. experiment that took place at Tuskegee over 40 years. We also hear things about Henrietta Lacks, and there's a film and a book on the experience of Henrietta Lacks. But fast forward in my career to what I have seen, and it's less about the talk and more about the walk. People have agency, and where Walgreens is going in the context of what comes to mind when I hear clinical trials, I hear opportunity to access medication. I hear opportunity to access healthcare professionals who you're already in a relationship with, because that's where you may go if you have a chronic illness or some disease that refers you to a local pharmacy on a monthly or regular basis to fill your script. So I see opportunity for improvement. I see more joy through better health, which is the mission of Walgreens.
Now, you mentioned some key moments. I know we all, if you're Black in America and you were of a certain age, you probably heard of the Tuskegee study.
Right.
You mentioned Henrietta Lacks. They did movies about her. There has been a number of highly publicized, and then there's those microaggressions that we all have experienced. If you've been Black long enough in America, you have experienced some sort of microaggressions. How do we find a way to kind of lower the apprehension when it comes to people of color participating in clinical trials?
It's a great question, and I think that we can take the facts, we can take the data. For example, if we look at the FDA as the regulatory authority that grants approval to medication, and we know that 20% of the drugs that have been approved have different response rates in people of different ethnicities and different races. And if we don't have that scientific knowledge in our hands, meaning specifically, the doctors don't have the scientific evidence in their hands, then they are less confident that that drug or that medical product is going to be effective and safe in the person they're giving it to. Equally, if patients don't hear from their doctor upon questioning, hey doc, is this going to work for me, who I am? Not generally for everybody, but if the doctor doesn't have confidence, the patient may not stay compliant or adherent with their therapy. And non-adherence to therapy is a huge problem. Is a huge problem, a very costly problem. So in order to lower that threshold to entry, people can take the historic information and put it into context, the same way we put historic information into context. We put it in museums. We talk about it, we address that it happened, and we talk about what has happened since, the controls that are in place to prevent things like that from happening again. And there's nothing better than becoming educated and informed yourself. We would love to see people with agency to say, yes, that happened, and not that happened and shut it down. We can also look at the data and statistics on the disproportionately higher morbidity and mortality in certain diseases. 8 out of the 10 causes of death, some preventable, but it's our behavior. We know that the social determinants of health make up more of the outcome and what goes into care than the clinical data from randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials. So that means that we've got to understand how people live, the choices that they make, the kinds of food they eat, the available places to walk and get exercise, the ability to be social. I mean, all of these social determinants are things that contribute to one's health and well-being. So we can become agents of our own well-being by becoming more informed.
Well, you brought up, and that's a fantastic answer. And so you brought up social determinants for health, and we talk about that, a lot here on multiple programs on Black Doctor. And one of the things that comes up is when we're talking about clinical trials, the old methodology was it would be at a university center, right? And we know that a lot of university centers, especially medical university centers, aren't located near, neighborhoods where people, ethnic minorities, a lot of ethnic diversity reside. And so that could be a problematic when we're trying to get a diversity of trial participants. How is Walgreens filling that gap between helping bridge that gap between the old way of doing clinical trials and kind of moving us into the 21st century and beyond, and how we can engage in clinical trials?
I'm so glad you asked this question, Ellis, is because it's one of the first steps that people can learn about in becoming more aware of what a retail pharmacy such as Walgreens is doing to help patients gain access. So the first step is the fact that, yes, on average, we know from consultancy data that's been widely discussed that it takes about 2 hours roughly to get to a clinical trial site. There are fewer and fewer experts. We know this from the literature. And if you have to find the needle in the haystack person who has the expertise, are you going to go to your boss and say, hey, I need to participate in this clinical trial. And oh, by the way, there might be 10 or 15 study visits over the course of the next year and a half. I'm going to have to take time off during banking hours where you're supposed to be working, and then coming home from work and taking care of your family. And oh, by the way, can't cook you dinner tonight. Have to go to a clinical trial visit. That's inconvenient for people. I mean, and there are very few people who can commit to that. Maybe we also know that if more affluent people are given the opportunity and clinicians who are investigators discuss the option of a clinical trial, it ends up being more affluent people who are participating, in part because of the location physically where those sites are. And there are fewer and fewer of those sites in urban areas. Well, if we think about where Walgreens are, again, 51 or approximately % of the Walgreens locations are in socially vulnerable communities. That means that if we, in an example of our Health Corners locations, and we have over 100 of these Health Corners locations in the US, this is a different configuration of the retail pharmacy. And by learning that the retail pharmacy is a point of entry, we have almost 7,000 of those stores with a private health room. A lot of people don't go to the pharmacy the way they go to their doctor. But if they knew that their local Walgreens store has a nurse-trained professional or healthcare provider in addition to the pharmacist and the pharmacy technician, they may not also know of the collaborations that Walgreens has. Walgreens has a network of primary care doctors through VillageMD, and VillageMD just acquired Summit Health. So we are expanding our primary care relationship strategically, because a lot of people don't have a primary care doctor and they don't have continuity of care. They may have the means to refill their prescription, but they may not see that primary care physician regularly. So that partnership is some way that we are enabling our operations. In addition, we have partnerships with CareCentrix, and CareCentrix is a strategic partner because even though the Walgreens is within 5 miles of 78% of Americans, some people can't get up and go to the local Walgreens store. So if there is a need for at-home services, we have CareCentrix to arrange that care for patients as it's needed. We have several other strategic relationships, and I can get into the detail of that. I want to be mindful of time in my response, though.
No. It's great information, and even one of the viewers said, "Educate us." So she was, and right. So absolutely, at home is important. So my next question for you is really, kind of more deeper into what is happening with Walgreens. So how is Walgreens leveraging data? So we talked about moving into the future, we know we use a lot of data and digital technologies. So how is Walgreens leveraging that data and digital technologies to expand participation in clinical trials?
Right. Healthcare is not the only industry making use of the data. It's ubiquitous in our lives right now. So one of the key ways that we are leveraging data is, again, as I mentioned, we've got 130 million pharmacy records that Walgreens sits on. We have a collaboration to match and marry the electronic medical record data to the pharmacy data. And what that enables us to do is to give to a sponsor the number of patients that are eligible against a protocol for a trial that they'd like to run. So whether you're this company or that company, you come to Walgreens as the person who's providing the service of clinical trials, we will do patient recruitment by giving you first the number of patients in the physical geography who meet the eligibility criteria, the inclusion-exclusion criteria for a trial. So that's one of the first ways. It's called a cohort browser. My colleague, one of my rockstar teammates, Liam Wood, and his team have responsible for the cohort browser. But that gives us the ability to be very precise in the number of patients that we can tell a sponsor are eligible to participate in clinical trials. We also have a head of real world evidence, Jim Carroll, another one of my rockstar teammates. And Jim Carroll is building out a team of data scientists to run analytics, looking for patterns and trends in the data so that they can inform us of better ways that patients can take care of themselves. Now, that information, of course, is with patient authorized use of that information. So we can find out whether or not a person has been screened at an appropriate age, for example. If they're eligible for that screening, but they didn't do it, maybe they don't even know they were supposed to. So helping patients to take better care of themselves is one of the hallmarks of the business for us. And so I have got a couple of other members of our team under the leadership of Ramita Tandon. So there's a long way to go in this journey. We are just getting started. The business launched in June of last year. So we are building the foundation currently.
So I hear what you're saying, and I love the partnerships. I love the fact you're building kind of a network of providers. I love that, and I love the fact that it's accessible. So we talked about that as well. So in what ways can communities, particularly underrepresented communities in clinical trials, how can they gain access to the opportunity to participate in a Walgreens clinical trial?
Yeah, and let me just take one step back and put a picture of context before responding. So if you think about the last 2.5 plus years of this pandemic, we've lost 6.7 million people globally and over 1 million people in the United States. And just a few weeks ago, Ramita Tandon, the Chief Trials Officer for Walgreens, had the tremendous opportunity to participate in a White House virtual roundtable with a number of experts, including the Commissioner of Health, Dr. Robert Califf. And this was about emergency preparedness for clinical trials. So how are Americans becoming aware of what a clinical trial is in the first place in the context of the care that they receive? Now, if we think about the number of jobs that were lost during the pandemic, we can also think about the fact that if you lose your job, you may lose your health insurance. If you lose your health insurance, you lose your access to taking care of yourself and maintaining care during the time when you have no coverage. And so a clinical trial may be a gateway to bridge that access to care. So the goals that we have in this clinical trial business are to redefine what the patient experience is. There are a number of barriers from the patient's point of view that are well documented in the literature about barriers to participation. Fear and mistrust of the medical establishment is one thing. Fear of being on a placebo. Some people say, well, I don't want to risk, given the condition that I have, that what if I'm assigned to a placebo? If it's that design of a study, that's a barrier for some patients. Proximity, we know, the distance to sites being an issue for some patients. And we also know that a lot of doctors don't do clinical trials, and that those who do clinical trials do one. So what Walgreens is looking to do is to redefine the entire experience, the entire journey of participation from the time that there is outreach. Just because a person has a phone number doesn't mean you can blast text messages to them. If they have an email, right? If they're an email, they have an email address, their adult child could have been the person who set up that email address so that their parent can have an account separate from the adult child's account. So we have to redefine and think through and pressure test what are the pain points in the clinical trial process traditionally that we can solve given our assets, given our digital assets, given our physical footprint, and again, 9,000 stores in the US. Walgreens also, because of where we are, can increase diversity by communicating and engaging with communities across this country. So by sheer virtue of our proximity to where patients already are, and the pharmacist being a trusted healthcare provider that the patient already knows, we stand a chance of doing a better job than has been done in the past. And I think this is you'll see more and more more discussion around the retail pharmacy as a point of entry to clinical trials. And who's the boots on the ground in the community? It's the faith-based organizations. It's federally qualified health centers. It is academic institutions. It is civic organizations. It is those organizations who are also trying to reach their constituents with the right content that is from a trusted messenger, because you don't want to have somebody in a barbershop or a hair salon giving misinformation. People have to have context and understand what is accurate, and therefore they have to have a way to filter out the noise of things that are inaccurate in what they hear. So it's important to make sure that you are taking your information from trusted sources and professionals in the area that you're listening to.
Well, that's a lot. And what I'm hearing and what the audience is responding to is, we don't want those spam calls. We don't want those robocalls. We don't want those spam emails. We got enough emails we got to filter through. So I'm with you on that. I'm about to start shouting when you say, I'm doing a praise dance right here in my chair. But ultimately, it's really about being accessible, being somebody that's transparent, and making it easy. And I'm going a little old school. I'm a little older. I was there when everything started on the internet. And one of the things that I now is, if I've got to get to too many clicks to get to what I want, get to what I need, I'm probably going to stop about halfway through. Right. And that's just the reality of the way the end user consumer works. And so it seems like you're removing some of that tape, you're removing some of that foolishness that gets in the way of actual real participation, because that participation is how lives get changed. That's right. How illnesses and new medications get developed. That's how new treatment plans get developed. But we've got to get people to that endpoint. And the way we do that is by moving some of those obstacles. Right. Some of you have to move around. Some of them, we just move it out of the way, right, so they can get to that endpoint. And it seems like that's what Walgreens is doing to help people move some of those obstacles so they can get to the endpoint, which is an overall better healthcare experience.
Precisely. At this time in our history, only about 5% of people in the country participate in clinical trials. And if people knew that the data that goes into the medications that come to the market only includes 5% of the people, that may not be sufficient to address your personal needs. So right. It is in our interest as a society to contemplate what in the world a clinical trial is in the first place. I mean, this pandemic has introduced what clinical trials are to the person who's not in the life sciences industry. And so to see a vaccine come so quickly, people have a lot of questions, and they need to be able to go through the steps to know it's really not that deep. It's simply something that people may not have been exposed to in the past. And with Walgreens being over 100-year-old organization, we have something that we call the Triple E. And first, we want to educate people. So we've got to engage people first. People have to let us know that it's okay to talk to them about clinical trials, because we're not going to go spamming the universe. We are going to speak to people who are interested in being in conversation with us. And it's not a transaction. It is a continuum of conversation where people are already coming to the Walgreens location or the retail pharmacy for repeat refill of their prescriptions. So why not see that as a partner for more information? There will be more than just a one professional situation in most communities. So we have the opportunity to engage, we have the opportunity to educate, and people can come away from the experience empowered so that they can make informed decisions. And that's the difference in the Walgreens of the future than the traditional retail pharmacy where you just go and pick up your script.
So I'm going to ask you another thing. So this is one of the things. I was in a former life, I was a counselor. Uh-huh. And so one of the things we would do is we'd say, if you could wave a magic wand, right? And then you say, okay, you can wave a magic wand, and what would you see 10, 20, 30 years from now in this space of clinical trials at Walgreens?
I would see 20 years from now, and I hope it doesn't take 20 years, that people are telling industry about how interested they are in participating in a trial in a disease that they have been diagnosed with, not the other way around, where people are looking at a needle in a haystack and trying to figure out which eligible patients are going to volunteer. Because just because one is eligible doesn't mean that they have the education or the wherewithal to know, is this something I'm really trying to be involved in? I don't know that I've ever had a conversation with anybody my whole life about clinical trials. So if I get an email about one, or if I get a text message about one, do I know that I can make an informed decision to do it? Well, in the future, and again, not 20 years in the future, we're flipping the script. People
Right.
will take control of their health and not look at the bullet on industry employee slides that say, underrepresented minorities, Black and brown communities do not participate in clinical trials out of fear. And that is the standard refrain. And that may be true, and that may have had context. But in the future, when people understand what clinical trials are in the context of their care, we will see clinical trials as a part of the care continuum, so that we don't just say goodbye after the clinical trial ends. We will see you again and again for more education, more information, sharing that information. God forbid something happened to your next door neighbor. If you have no ability to respond to your next door neighbor, what if in the next occasion it's you who needs some help? Wouldn't it be nice if you could look to your left or your right of your neighbors and hope that somebody understands what to do in the context of whether or not a clinical trial is warranted in the circumstance that you have of your illness? So I think that in the future, hopefully, again, not 20 years down the road, we will see people taking control of their lives in a different way in the context of clinical trial access, clinical trial participation, so that that scientific knowledge goes into the medical product that they may eventually be prescribed, and have some confidence that that medication has been tested to be effective and safe for them.
Yes. And, you know, and that's the one thing. And one of our audience members that's been really adding some great context in the comments, and she talked about she participated in the clinical trials before, and she said, yeah, and she made a very good point, is that some clinical trials don't always include medication, and that's a good point.
True. That's true.
So it's about just the treatment. Sometimes it's really about, okay, is it better in the morning or is it better at night? It could be something that's already existing. And then we can talk about, hey, is it better if you take it with food or without? So all of those things get done. And then sometimes we do a clinical trial to see what's the tolerance level. So there's multiple ways that you can get involved in clinical trials. The other beautiful thing for Black folks is this: number one, the treatment is at no cost to you, right? So you get to go, you get the latest treatment, you get to take some of the latest medications. So by the time it gets to you, there's phases of clinical trials. By the time it gets to you, if it's a medication-based trial, it's already been deemed safe for human consumption. We've already gone through those earlier phases. Now we're just talking about, we're expanding the number of people that are in the trial so we can see more how it's impacting. And that's why we need people of color to be in those, because if it's only uniform, then they're gonna say, okay, great, they got great data on that one particular demographic. But there, as you know, there are differences in the way our bodies work and the way other ethnicities' bodies work. And so we have to really get involved. And the theme of this show that we always use is involvement improves outcomes. And that is one of the things I stand by. We cannot improve our outcomes if we do not get involved. So it's a beautiful thing.
Right. Don't talk about it, be about it. Right?
Absolutely. And that's a cliche in our community, but you know what? It's real. That is so real. And so we're just really excited about the opportunity to be about it. And that's why we're doing this program. So one more word association for you: health disparities. What does that mean?
Well, in the clinical context, and I am not a physician, my background is public health, but in a clinical sense, health disparities being and diversity in clinical trial being of paramount importance for all people, not just for people in life sciences, but health disparities being the differences in the way that in the conversation we're having, the context of clinical care is different for some populations. Sometimes your race or your ethnicity may contribute different pharmacokinetics, different pharmacodynamics, the way the body responds to the drug, the way the drug responds to our bodies. We have to know about those differences in order to arm the clinician providing that medication to patients, so that patients will know the benefit of the effectiveness of the medication and the safety of the medication. If that knowledge is not behind the molecule, then when the molecule is approved, or the medication, a medical product is approved in the market, then we're asking the population to say, surveillance studies will let us know whether or not those differences exist. Right. So the disparities are something that we can know in advance. And if more people participate in clinical trials, more diverse patients specifically participate in clinical trials, we will arm ourselves with that knowledge to know what is representative when it comes to the market. And that's really the critical factor for us, is interest in having a representative population so that it matches who takes the medication and that knowledge is known up front.
Fantastic. So last question, and we'll let you go.
Okay.
What's next for Kendal and Walgreens?
What's next for Kendal? Well, I've got a team. So just as Ramita Tandon was a two-person show before this team was established in June, I've got team members that will be coming online. So you will see more staff within real-world evidence clinical trials that are specific to the digital optimization piece, because we need community partnerships. We need to be able to not just have the larger strategic partnerships that Walgreens Boot Alliance has, but the business of clinical trials needs community engagement. So we will be activating with our staff. We'll be going to communities across the country. So if you think about health disparities, it's not just age group disparity. It's not just racial disparity. It's not just ethnicity disparity, but it's sexual identity disparity. It's all kinds of differences between groups of people. We are looking for groups of people. We are looking for civic organizations, federally qualified health centers, local faith-based organizations, so that it's not just Walgreens, it is communities sharing with us, what is it that you need, and how can we be a partner to help co-create the needs that reach our constituencies, patients, communities, and that's where Walgreens is going.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I do have one with this that's within 5 miles of my house, so
Awesome.
it rings true for me as well. This has been a fantastic conversation. It could continue. Like we could just talk about this all night, because it's near and dear to both of us. I can feel your passion through my computer screen, and I hope you can feel mine about this, because it's really about taking our health to the next level. And we're talking about being an advocate. And when we say that word is thrown out a lot here recently, and it's become a buzzword in the healthcare industry, but it really is a calling and a passion of mine. And I want people to be an advocate for themselves more so than anything else. You control your health more than any other entity in the world. You control your health from the time everything you put in your mouth to what you do or don't do with your body. That has more control over your health than anything. And so pairing with a wonderful partner like Walgreens, getting involved in clinical trials not only improves your outcomes, your personal outcomes, but it improves the outcomes of an entire community and people that are coming and generations behind you. So it's really about being committed to the community and committed to yourself. Yes, ma'am. I don't work.
Here. Power to the people.
Absolutely. I should have had my black glove. Hey, that's it.
It is power to the people. Power to the people. People have spoken.
Well, in the words of that famous late great Don Cornelius, love, peace, and so.
This was fun.
Y'all have a great night. Thank you all for joining us. It's just fantastic. Thank you all for hanging with us in the chat room. Thank you so much. And we'll see y'all next time. We're going to be doing this every month. I have one show per month. We're going to do this every month until we get those numbers up in terms of people of color getting involved in the clinical trial. So we'll be here. Y'all come find me. We'll see y'all next time.
Thanks, Ellis.